There is a photograph on my nightstand. I have looked at it every morning for 43 years. It shows a young woman, maybe 22, standing in front of a harbor, her hair loose in the wind, laughing at something off camera. She looks completely free, completely herself. I do not always recognize her right away. That woman is me. And the reason I don't always recognize her, the reason she feels like someone I once read about in a book, is the thing I need to tell you today, before I run out of days to tell it. I am 91 years old. I've buried a husband, 2 brothers, and more friends than I can count on both hands. I've watched the world change 6 or 7 times over. I've laughed enormously. I've wept in ways that left marks I still carry, and I've spent the better part of a century learning one lesson that nobody warned me about. Nobody warned me, not once. I will warn you now. Sit with me for a little while. I'm not going to shout at you. I'm not going to try to frighten you or impress you. I'm too old for theater. What I want to do is simply tell you the truth. The slow, quiet truth that took me 8 decades to fully understand. It is about trust. Specifically, it is about the kind of trust we place in other people, the people who love us, and what that kind of trust can quietly do to a life over time. I want to start somewhere unusual. I want to start with approval, because I think approval is the invisible architecture of most human lives, including mine, including probably yours. When I was a girl, very young, maybe 8 or 9, I discovered something almost by accident. When I made my mother happy, the whole house felt warmer. It sounds simple, but if you sit with that for a moment, you'll understand what I mean. When I did the right thing, said the right thing, behaved the right way, she smiled. And when she smiled, something in me relaxed in a way I cannot fully describe. Like a muscle I hadn't known was clenched, finally letting go. I learned this quickly, the way children learn everything, without thinking about it, just absorbing it into the body. Make her happy, feel safe, disappoint her, feel the cold. I was a clever little girl. I became very good at making her happy. The problem was, I never stopped. By the time I was 19, I had become a kind of expert in other people's comfort. I could read a room the way some people read weather. I knew without being told when my father was tired and needed quiet. I knew when my older sister needed to feel like the smart one. I knew when my friends needed me to be smaller, less certain, less visible, so they could feel bigger. And I shrank. Quietly, cheerfully, I shrank. I want you to understand, nobody asked me to do this. Nobody held a gun to my head and said, disappear a little, make it easier for us. That is the strange, almost eerie thing about this kind of trust, this misplaced trust in other people's comfort as your guiding star. It happens entirely on the inside. Nobody forces it. You choose it over and over, invisibly. You choose it because it works. That's the terrible thing. Approval feels like love. Acceptance feels like safety. And when you're young, and the world is large and frightening, safety feels like everything. I want to tell you about a specific moment, a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was 26. I'd have been quietly in love with painting for most of my life, not as a hobby, not as a nice thing I did on weekends, but in that deep, consuming way. that makes you feel most yourself. When I painted, I stopped performing. I stopped managing everyone's feelings. I was just there, in the work, completely present. I had saved money. I had a real plan. There was a small studio in the city I could afford for exactly 1 year. I had it mapped out. I knew what I was going to do. I told my family over dinner. I remember the exact silence that followed. My mother didn't say anything cruel. She didn't yell. She just looked at me with this particular expression, a mixture of worry and something else I can only now name as grief. Like I had just told her I had a fever that wasn't going to break. "You're so talented," she said finally. "But what happens if it doesn't work? Who takes care of you?" My uncle, who was visiting that week, laughed softly. Not mockingly, just that small, sad laugh adults use when they think a young person is being naive. My father said nothing, but he reached over and refilled his glass. And I knew, somehow I knew, that his silence was not approval. Within 3 weeks, I had given up the idea of the studio. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself I was growing up. I told myself that the people who loved me knew things I didn't know yet. What I didn't understand then, what I couldn't see, was that I hadn't listened to wisdom. I'd listened to fear, their fear, and I'd wrapped it around myself like a coat and called it maturity. I married at 29. He was a good man. I want to say that clearly. A genuinely good man who loved me in the way he knew how to love. But I had chosen him, in part because everyone approved of him. My mother adored him. My friends said he was steady, responsible, the kind of man a sensible woman wanted. And there was some truth in that. But there was also this. I had chosen him partly because choosing him felt safe. Not safe from the world, safe from disapproval, safe from that cold quiet that settles over a house when you have done the wrong thing. We spent 37 years together. There were real joys. There were good decades. But there was also this persistent quiet ache, not dramatic, not sharp, just always there, that I had made the central choice of my life the way you choose a coat, because other people say it suits you, rather than because you feel something when you put it on. He died in his sleep on a Thursday morning, in April, 22 years ago now, and I grieved him properly, genuinely. He deserved that grief. But in the months that followed, alone in this house, I began for the first time in my life to ask a question I'd been avoiding for decades. What do I actually want? Not what would make my mother proud. Not what would make sense to my friends. Not what would look right from the outside. What do I actually want? I was 69 years old, and I barely knew how to answer the question. I think there is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from spending a life performing for an audience. It is not the loneliness of being alone. I have been alone plenty and not felt it. It is a more intimate loneliness. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who love you and realizing that the person they love is partly a character you invented for them. You constructed her carefully. She was kind, agreeable, sensible. She didn't want too much. She didn't need too much. She made the people around her comfortable. And over time, you forgot where she ended and you began. That is the real danger of misplaced trust. not betrayal, not cruelty, nothing so dramatic. The real danger is this quiet erosion of yourself that happens when you're always looking outward for confirmation that you exist correctly. I had trusted other people's approval to tell me who I was, and it worked until it didn't. Until I was 69 and sitting in an empty house asking a question a 20-year-old should have been allowed to ask. Now, I need to be careful here, because I'm not telling you that the people who love me did something wrong. This is important. Please hear it. My mother was not manipulating me. My uncle was not trying to diminish me. My husband was not a mistake that someone else forced on me. These were people doing what people do, sharing their worldview, their anxieties, their genuine hopes for me, all filtered through the glass of their own lives and limitations. They were not villains. They were human beings, wonderfully, tragically, completely human beings. The mistake was mine, and I use the word mistake loosely, because I was not wrong to love them. I was not wrong to care about their feelings. I was not wrong to want their approval. The mistake was in the architecture I built around it. I made their approval the load-bearing wall of my life. I made their comfort my primary job. I made their version of me more real to me than my own. That is what I mean when I say, trust no one, not even your family. I don't mean distrust them. I don't mean suspect them or close yourself off from them. I mean this: do not outsource the knowledge of yourself to anyone, not to the people who love you most, not to the ones who have known you longest, not to the voices that have been the loudest in your life. You are the only one living from the inside of your own experience. You are the only one who has access to the full document of who you are. Everyone else, even the people who love you, is reading summaries. They are reading the version of you that you have shown them, filtered through their own needs and narratives and blind spots. They cannot know what you know about yourself. And the moment you trust their version of you more than your own, the moment you let their reading of the summary override what you know from the inside, you have handed over something irreplaceable. I went back to painting at 71. I know. That is not the triumphant comeback story. There is something almost unbearably sad about it, actually. The gap between 26 and 71. All those years of the work undone. But I want to tell you what happened when I did. The first time I stood in front of a canvas again, a real canvas in a small studio I rented downtown, I cried. Not from sadness, from something much stranger. Recognition. Like running into yourself on the street after decades apart. I'd forgotten what it felt like to do something simply because my soul required it. No performance, no audience, no quiet checking over my shoulder to see if anyone approved, just the work and me and the terrifying, beautiful intimacy of that. I painted almost every day for the next several years. I was never famous. I was never particularly good in any technical sense that the world would recognize. None of that mattered. What mattered was that I had finally done the thing because I needed to do it, not because anyone gave me permission, not because anyone was watching. I want you to understand the cost of those 45 years between the harbor in that photograph and the studio where I finally went back. I'm not telling you to mourn it. I have made my peace. But I want you to understand the cost, not abstractly, not as a cautionary tale, but in the weight of what it actually feels like. 45 years is a long time to wait to come home to yourself. There's a question I've thought about often in my older age. Why do we find it so difficult to trust ourselves? I have a theory. It is not scientific. It is just what I have observed from the inside of a very long life. I think we are trained from the very beginning to believe that other people know something we don't. Parents know more than children. Teachers know more than students. Society knows more than individuals. And in many things this is true. There's real wisdom in experience. There's real knowledge in tradition. But somewhere along the way, this reasonable observation becomes a deeply unreasonable belief. We start to believe that other people know more than us, not just about the world, but about us, about who we are, about what we should do, about what we deserve. And we carry this belief straight into adulthood, straight through the decades, never really questioning it. I can see it now, looking back. Every major fork in my road, I looked outward first. I consulted. I waited for the nod. I listened for the approval. And the quiet voice inside me, the one that knew things, the one that had always known things, I had trained myself very young to regard it as unreliable, too risky, too selfish even. Trusting yourself in the world I grew up in was considered a kind of arrogance. Who do you think you are? That was the question, implied, always, in the disapproval. Who do you think you are? I should have had a better answer. I want to talk for a moment about emotional dependence, because I think it is one of the great unspoken sorrows of human life, and nobody seems to name it directly. Emotional dependence is not weakness. I want to say that first. It is not a character flaw. It is a very human response to the very human need for connection and belonging. But it becomes its own kind of prison. When your emotional equilibrium depends on whether the people around you are happy with you, when you cannot feel settled in yourself until you have read the room and received confirmation that you're acceptable, you have, in a very real sense, given your interior life to someone else. Every morning, you wake up and check, am I okay? And the answer doesn't come from within. It comes from scanning the faces around you, reading the temperature of the room, calculating whether you have done enough, been enough, shrunk enough. It is exhausting. I know how exhausting it is. I did it for decades, and the cost is not just exhaustion. The cost is that you slowly, incrementally lose your ability to trust your own perceptions. You begin to second guess what you feel. You begin to wonder if your wants are too much. You begin to edit yourself before you have even spoken. You become, over time, a heavily revised document, and the original, that unguarded, unedited version of you, gets further and further from the surface. I had a conversation with my granddaughter about 2 years ago. She's in her 30s, bright and serious, and she was going through a particularly painful time, trying to make a decision that mattered enormously to her and feeling paralyzed by it. She asked me, "How did you know? When you were my age, how did you know what the right choice was?" I was quiet for a moment, and then I told her something I had never said out loud before. I told her, "At your age, I almost always knew. I just almost never trusted it." She looked at me for a long moment. "I think I have the same problem," she said. I took her hand. We sat there for a while, in the quiet. The knowing is rarely the difficult part. The trusting of the knowing, that is the whole work. That is a lifelong, unglamorous, deeply private work of learning to live from the inside out rather than the outside in. Here is what I know now at 91. You already know more about your life than anyone else ever will. You know what drains you. You know what lights something up in you. You know which choices leave you feeling hollow, and which ones, even when they're difficult, leave you feeling like yourself. You have access to this knowledge every day. You have probably always had it. The question is not how to acquire wisdom about yourself. The question is whether you're willing to trust what you already know. This is harder than it sounds, because trusting yourself often means disappointing people. It means making choices that others don't immediately understand or approve of. It means sitting with the discomfort of their uncertainty, their worry, their gentle or not so gentle pressure. It means answering, quietly but clearly, that question. Who do you think you are? With something real. I'm the only person who will be present for every moment of this life. I'm the only one who will stand at the end of it and account for what I did with it. And I can love you. I can hear you. I can consider what you think. But I cannot let you decide who I am. I want to say something about forgiveness, because I think any honest conversation about trust has to eventually get there. I spent some years, in my late 50s and 60s, with a quiet anger I didn't fully acknowledge. Not rage, nothing so clear. Just a low-grade resentment toward the people and the voices and the structures that had shaped the choices I'd made. The culture that told women to be agreeable. The family that needed me to be small. The version of love that looked a lot like management. I was not wrong to feel it. The anger was honest. But I also know what carrying it did to me. It kept me looking backward. It kept the wound fresher than it needed to be. What freed me, slowly, imperfectly over years, was understanding that everyone I had trusted too much, everyone whose approval I'd made into a compass, was also doing their best with what they had. They were also shaped. They were also afraid. They were also in many ways still waiting for permission from somewhere. Forgiving them was not excusing them. It was just releasing them from a responsibility they had never been equipped to carry, and releasing myself from the long project of blaming them for what only I could have changed. The choices were mine, all along. The choices were mine. That is a hard thing to sit with, and also, strangely, a liberating one. I am 91. I wake up most mornings now in the slow, deliberate way old people wake, taking stock, settling back into the body, remembering where and when I am. And most mornings I look at that photograph on the nightstand, the young woman at the harbor, her hair loose in the wind. I understand her better now than I did for most of my life. She was not naive. She was not reckless. She was not someone who needed to be saved from herself. She was someone who knew things, who had always known things, and who needed, more than anything, to be trusted, to trust herself. I could not give her that then. I can give it to you now. Not as advice. I'm too old and too tired for the performance of giving advice. just as a quiet truth from the end of a long road. You know yourself. You've always known yourself. Love the people around you. Let them in. Cherish them fiercely. The people who love you are among the most precious things this world will give you. But when you are standing at a crossroads, when the choice matters, when it is one of the choices that defines the texture of a life, walk into the deepest, quietest part of yourself. Not the part that is performing for anyone, not the part that is managing how you appear. The deep part, the original part, the part that has been patient with you all this time. Listen to it. Trust it. It has been waiting a very long time for you to do exactly that. The light through my window is that particular gold that only happens in late afternoon. I have always loved it. I used to rush past it. I was always going somewhere, managing something, being useful to someone. Now I sit in it. It is enough. It has always been enough. So are you. Take care of yourself, young one. You are all you have, and you are quite enough.